Okay. That's good. Welcome, I hope. Anyway, we are picking up from verse 2. It took us a whole session, and a long one at that, to do verse Aleph. Today, we're going to start from verse Bet, and we'll see how far we get. I put as the title verse 2 to 10. There's much less of the Targumei in the next set of verses, so we'll see what we've got. And I sure hope that everybody is recovered from Corona and that next week we can all meet in person and sing and dance and have fun with what we are learning and with Adar and everything else. Okay, so the next verse is V'yavo ad lifnei sha'ar hamelech ki ein lavo el sha'ar hamelech b'levush sak. If I were to translate that into English, I would say, and he came. We were talking about Mordechai. Remember, he was the one who went out with this bitter cry, dressed in sackcloth, sprinkling ashes on his head. And he came ad, just up until in front of the gate of the king, because in Hebrew, it seems perfectly reasonable to say it that way. It's like it's not done. One doesn't come into the gate of the king wearing sackcloth. Now, remember, the gate of the king, it doesn't just mean that you don't, it's not a little gate, okay? If you've been in Jerusalem and you think about the gates to the old city, the gates to the old city are wider than my living rooms, okay? The gate of a palace, the gate of a public place was where a lot of business got transacted. It's not, right? It's not a narrow little wall with a little metal gate or something like you might have on a picket fence or whatever. It's a great big area. And there are offices off of it, and it's really large, and it's a public place, and all sorts of stuff is going on there, and he can't even enter into that area. And remember, that's where Mordechai normally sits. He's a judge. He's a public figure, and he's now staying outside because he's not dressed appropriately. That seems to be the English, what's going on in the story. The Targum Rishon says, "V'ata ad kadam tra paltira de malka," and he came. Remember, there are two different words for to come. This is to come, not to enter into. The aleph taf aleph is to come, actually all the way up to somebody to enter into their room or into their space would be the shorish ayin lamed. So here the Targum is picking which word to use for vayavo based on what's coming in the rest of the verse. Ad kadam tra paltira is exactly until before the gate, but instead of just Hamelech, it's paltira de malka, the king's palace. A room late Rishul Gvar Lemeal Litra Paltera de Malka Kad Vish Lavusha Desak, because there's no Rishu is like the word Rishut or Rishayon. There's no permission granted to a person to enter. Here we have that Ayin Lamed verb, okay, to enter into the gate of the king's palace when he's dressed in clothing of sackcloth. Okay, there's no reason given why that's the case. And now I'm going to have to keep going back and forth with the share because the Targum Sheni, of course, is still not on not on Svarya, nor is the Patshek and Ktav. And so I have a document, which I'm happy to share with anybody who wants it. I can email you these documents. I would really like it if people were to sign up on the Zoom. Not only do you then get an email, etc., but we have some sort of idea of who's there, who's not there, and you can get these documents for yourself. So I'm going to make this window larger. And there we go. Okay, so actually, verse bet starts right here. Va'ata, okay, same as we had in Targum Rishon. L'kadam tra paltrin instead of paltirab, same idea. Demalka. There's a little bit more added in here. Metul, because gazerta it gazrat de la yete enesh latara beit malka b'levusha desaka. It's not just it wasn't done, it's not appropriate, you're not dressed right, but there was actually a gezerah. There was actually a decree that had been promulgated that people should not come into the gate of the house of the king wearing sackcloth. Now, Targum Sheni is going to tell us kashur and not kashur, okay? There was a gavra, midvet Yisrael, azil ligvar amamaya, va'amar le bai ana minach. Okay, there was a person from among the house of Israel who went to a person of the other nations. And he said to him, I have a request to make of you. Let me and my children and my wife be your slaves. You don't even have to give me any money for it. We'll just work for you, right? What am I asking for in return? Min hadin kata. And only that we should be saved from this butchery, this murder that's being planned, right? Amarle gavra amamaya levar Yisrael, and the person of the nations responded to the Bar Yisrael, meaning the son of, like Bar Yochai. Okay, it's the Aramaic word for son, to the Ben Yisrael, to the Jew. La chazet maktiv b'ditagma defax. Malka Achashverosh, didn't you see what's written in the promulgation, this Patsheg and Ktav, that was that the king Achashverosh caused to be distributed? The kol gavra amamaya demishtachach gaboy gavra Yehudai yitkatel kavate, that any person of the other nations that is found by him, a Jewish person, is going, the word man, person, I think here is independent, right? Like it doesn't have a whole lot of difference. Either way, you got to find a Jewish person there. Then that whole family where that Jewish person is found is also going to be killed just like him, meaning just like the Jew. B'chein hava gavra Yisrael azale levete ba'akta rabba. And so then this man, the Jewish man, took himself back to his home with great sorrow, great lachatz. He was feeling very, like, where is he going to turn? Be'sha'ata it kayam al Beit Israel ma dichtiv b'Sifra de Moshe. And so at that moment, it was fulfilled on the house of Israel, that which was written in Sifra de Moshe, meaning the Torah. Okay, and So it's interesting. Sometimes when you're giving a shiur, and if you're giving a shiur and it's partly Hebrew, partly English, right? You first say it in Hebrew and then you translate it. Sometimes if you're giving a shiur totally in English, you don't bother reading the Hebrew equivalent. You say, this is what's written. Now we know that what's written in the Torah is actually written in Hebrew. But if you're just giving over the story, or you're giving over a class or whatever, and you don't want to take the time to be going back and forth, language to language, language to language. So you say, like in the beginning, right? You don't say that. You just say, in the beginning, the Lord, God created the heavens and the earth. Okay? And I can say that. Now, I know that the words that I just said in English are not the same words that are in the Torah itself, but I don't have to give you first the Hebrew and that. And so that's exactly what they're doing here. They're about to give me a verse from the Torah, but they're not actually going to give me the verse from the Torah. They're going to give me a translation of the verse from the Torah into Aramaic, because this is a story, a book, which is written in Aramaic. Okay, so in Aramaic, it says, "V'tiz rabnun." Wait a second. Right. This is okay. Excuse me. It's actually should be tis dabnun. That the resh dal there's a little hard for me to read because of the way I took the picture. I apologize. The tis dabnun taman lebale devavecho. La'avdin or la'amahar v'leit dekane, and you will be sold there to your enemies as slaves and maidservants, and there will be none who will buy it. Now, if you look over in Patshag and Ktav, okay, here's Patshag and Ktav, and Bet didn't start up as high. Bet actually started here, and we're still reading in Bet, and he says, and here it is down all the way down here in the Patshag and Ktav, which is the Hebrew translation. So he says, "Az hayah Yisrael," he went home, but Tzara Gedolah. That was the act, right? Ba'akta Rabbah. And at that time, it was fulfilled on the house of Israel that which was written in not just the Sefer of Moshe, Sefer Torat Moshe. So you see that even the translation from the Aramaic back into the Hebrew is not always, it's not literal. It's not word for word exactly matching up. And this is the verse, right? Okay. Now, it's interesting. Usually that's from one of the Tochachos. Okay. Excuse me, usually that tochacha is taken, not that it was fulfilled in the time of Beit Rishon, but that it was fulfilled in the time of Beit Sheni. It's known that the Romans took so many Jews, slaves, that they depressed the cost of slaves through the entire Mediterranean basin, the entire Middle East. And there were so many slaves available that unless you had something special going for you, nobody would bother buying you. Okay, in other words, if you were super strong, so it's worthwhile to get somebody who's super strong. Okay, for that, they're willing to buy a slave. If you were really beautiful and the slave owner wanted to look at somebody who was really beautiful, okay. If you knew how to read and write, and the slave owner had a reason that they needed somebody who could, do math and do calculations and things like that, so they might buy you. But stam, to be a slave, wasn't worth it. They had so many slaves available that and that was actually pretty awful because people had no way of earning a living. Okay, I mean, being a slave is not great, but being a slave meant that you had a roof on your head, over your head, and you had food and you had clothing. And if you weren't bought as a slave, it was a death sentence. Because what are you going to do with it? Okay, so that happened, Rahman Zlan, in the wake of Churban Beit Sheni. And it's known and it's documented elsewhere, etc. It's not usually discussed in the light of Churban Beit Rishon. And in fact, this doesn't happen immediately, right? When does this happen? They're afraid this is going to happen. They want to sell themselves as slaves, right? Think about last week's Parsha and Mishpatim. And not only do they want to sell themselves as slaves, they're willing to sell themselves to non-Jews as slaves. And there's nobody who's willing to buy them. And so the author of Targum Sheni is saying, this is a different way of understanding how this verse comes to pass in the world. And he goes on. Okay. And he goes on and he says, B'kol yoma v'yoma hava kol gavra v'gavra azil v'karei b'ditagma d'charas malka chashverish umina havu yadin kama it lahu naicha b'go alma. Okay, so every day, each person, meaning of the Jews, would go and he would read. The proclamation was posted on the wall, right, posted by the gates. He would go and he would read this proclamation that the king had caused to be spread out, to be made, like Lefarsem had been advertised, made public. Okay, the king Achashverosh. And from it, they would know, right, how much time was left to them in the world. Right? It was a countdown. So this time it's being called the Torah of Moshe. Okay, and therefore it was fulfilled on the house of Israel, that which was written in the Torah of Moshe. V'yahon chayechon tla'in la kivla v'tizdazun yamama v'lelia v'la tehemnun b'chayech. All right, it's written in the Torah of Moshe, and your lives will be hanging before you, opposite your eyes, and you will have great fear, day and night, and you won't have faith in your lives. Okay, that's basically what it sounds like from the Aramaic. The pasuk, and I'm not sure that even in the Patsheg and Ktav, I'm not sure that they actually gave me the exact pasuk, but it's very close. Vayu chayecha tluim lecha mineged, opposite of you. Upachdat laila v'yomam, which is that's the opposite order, but that's typical between Hebrew to Aramaic. We always do Lila and then day, and in Aramaic, it's usually day and then night. So that's actually a typical switch. V'lo tamin b'chayecha, and you won't believe, right? In other words, you won't have any faith in your life. You won't have any way of making plans. What are you going to do next? Because you don't have any faith that your life is going to continue long enough that it's worthwhile making plans. Okay, but Tzafra Temar Emat Yehave Ramsa. Ramsa Temar Emat Yehave Tzafra. Minziata Delivchon Di Tzum Umechezi Enechon Di Techazon. In the evening, you will say, in the morning, Tzafra and Ramsa. Okay, so tzafra is in the morning, you will say, oh, that it would only be evening, let the day be gone already. And in the evening, you'll say, oh, let it only be morning, let the night be over already, right? Because of this, again, this ziyata is the same language we've been hearing, this pachad, this fear that's in your heart that you are so afraid of, and because of that which your eyes have seen. The Hebrew equivalent is that B'boker in the morning, tomar mi ten erev, ube'erev tomar mi ten boker, mipachad levavcha asher tefached, u'mimareh einecha asher ter'eh. Then from the vision of your eyes that you're going to see. So they translate. I'm going from Aramaic to English and then making sure that we pick up the Hebrew. Anybody who signs up, again, a plug to please register. Anybody who signs up, I'll send you the, which tochacha it's in and the exact place of those verses. Okay, so now let's switch the share back again because we're done with that verse and we're going to go to verse 3. And it's going to get shorter. There's actually less that gets added in for many of these next verses. And then next week we'll have, again, like one verse that they just do a lot of. Okay, so Gimel. ובכל מדינה ומדינה, מקום אשר דבר המלך ודעתו מגיע, אבל גדול ליהודים וצום ובכי ומספד, שק ואפר יוצא לרבים. And in every province that there was any place that the word of the king and his law had reached, there was great mourning for the Jews, fasting and crying, and misped is like a eulogy. Okay, so eulogizing ourselves. There were, public speeches that had to do with the matter. Sak ve'efer yutzal rabim, the sackcloth and the ashes. Yutzah is an interesting word. So kind of has to do with like bedding. So it could be that they sat down in it. And the word rabim is also an interesting word. Does it mean that the vast majority of the Jews were all going around in their sackcloth and ashes? Does it mean, or does rabim mean the like rabbanim? Okay, and we're going to see here that the two different Targumei do different things. B'kol pilcha u'pilcha, b'kol kirya v'kirya, atar depitka malka, gzerat dinei matei, evla rabba lihudai. In every pelach is in every medina, and then instead of just the word makom, they add in ub'kol kirya v'kirya, every town within each province. Atar, a place that the word of the king and the decree of his new law reached there. Evla Rabba Yudai, there was great mourning for the Jews. Tsuma, ubechuta, right? Tzom, ubechi. Mispeda, that's the misped. That you see that there's great parallel in the languages. Uluvush sak v'kitma hava mitsam alave tzadikaya sagi. So Targum Rishon ignores that word yutzah. It just says mitzam. They put it on them. Okay? But who is the them? The rabbim are tzadikaya sagi, many righteous people. They all took that, and now I get to switch the share again. Okay, here we go. So, Pasuk Gimel finishes off this page. Ubokol medinta umedinta, that's because the word medina, excuse me, is a feminine word. So instead of just ending with the aleph, it ends with the taf aleph. So that's where you get the ta, as opposed to pilcha. Pelach is a masculine word, and so it just gets the aleph. Medina, which has the aleph, the hey rather, at the end of it, so it becomes medinta. Right? So we call medinta medinta, we call atar va'atar. They also add in not every town and town, but every place and place. That's what they're doing with that word makom in the original Hebrew. D, asher, pitkama demalko gzarte mate, that the word of the king and his decree reached. Evla takif lehudai. Not, so what kind of Evel Gadol is there, right? It could be that they were in great distress. Takif is a word meaning right? Something which is betokef is something which is current. It's right now. It's in your face. Okay, and takif also has the sense of it can be violence, but takif is something which is like very strong. It's not. It's background noise. It's not background noise. It's like always right there in their faces, right? So there was that kind of evil that they couldn't escape from for the Jews. V'tzoma uvachya, and here they add in a word, v'ayla v'sifta. Okay, so the tzom and the bechi and the misped, the fasting and the crying and the speechifying, that we know. What's the ayla? It's the la 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 la. It's the, which can be done in a happy tone, and it can also be done in a very, like, I can't get words out. I'm so unhappy. I'm crying and I have no words. And so it's yalla la la la. Okay, so that's this va'ila. V'sakya v'kitma mishkava l'sagin. So Targum Sheni, on the other hand, says for sagin, it's the multitudes. And they don't take it as Rabbim being great people. Okay, Rav as being somebody who's more important or whatever, but they just leave it as sagin, which is the meaning of many. But they also pay attention to that yutzah, and they're saying the sackcloth and the ashes became the mishkava. They slept, there was no relief. There was no relief. It wasn't just in the daytime. They slept with this also. It was their, it essentially became their bedding. It became that which was always with them. They could never get away from it. All right. Next verse. Oh my, I'm going to have to stand up in a minute here and switch and go plug my computer back in because it's showing me that it's unplugged. All right, so I'm going to leave you with the screen for a moment. Whoops, we're actually going to do verse 4 first. Okay, so here we are. Yes. The Tavona Narot Esther. Sorry, so we've switched scenes. Okay, the first scene was in the city of Shushan. Mordechai with the sackcloth and ashes, out in the midst of the city, depending on which Targum you read, gathering everybody together. Everybody reads this promulgation and tries to do something about it. And then it's no longer just Mordechai in sackcloth and ashes, it's everybody. Okay, or at least all of the other tzaddikim as well. Shift of scene. That's what's going outside the palace. What's going on inside the palace? V'tavona narot Esther, v'yigidu la v'tchalchal ma'aka ma'on. ותשלח בגדים להלביש את מרדכי ולהסיר שקו מעליו ולא קיבל. Now I'm actually going to do all three verses together. The maidens of Esther came and her sarisim, eunuchs, officers, the heads of her household. What exactly, we don't know. We'll see. The Targumei, we're going to go in different directions. And they told her. Chazal have different ways of explaining what that verb is, but she was like very taken aback. Oh my goodness, like what's going on? Okay, and she sent clothes to dress Mordechai that he should turn away, in other words, take off his sackcloth from him, and he didn't accept it. He didn't accept what she sent him. The Tikra Esther. I'm going to do 3 verses Hebrew English, and then I'm going to do Targum Rishon, and then I'm going to go do Targum Sheni. V'tikra Esther l'hatach misarisei hamelech. So now it's not Sariseh, it's not her Sarisim, he's one of the Sarisim of the Melech. Wait a minute, Asher ha'amid lefaneha, who had been stood before her. In other words, had been appointed to be with her, perhaps. V'tatzavehu al Mordechai, and she commanded him regarding Mordechai, or commanded him to go speak to Mordechai, not clear. L'da'at mazeh v'al mazeh. No, what is this and what is it about? The phrase, sorry about that, the cough is still with me. The corona is gone, the cough is going to be with me for a while. Now, what is this v'al mazeh, and what's it about? Now, like what's what? And don't you think that if you get the answer to what it is, that you're also going to get the answer as to why? So is it 2 different questions? Is it one question? V'yetzeh Hatach el Mordechai, and Hatach goes out to Mordechai, el rechov ha'ir, because he has to go out, right? He has to leave the palace altogether. He has to leave the gates of the palace altogether, because Mordechai is not allowed to come in. So Mordechai is outside on the main street in front of that. And he goes to the rechov ha'ir, our modern word, to the street of the city, and we'll see, Asher lifnei Sha'ar Melech, that's in front of, right, the main thoroughfare that's in front of the gate of the king. That's the 3 psukim. So now let's take a look at Targum Rishon. Targum Rishon says, V'alan uleman de Esther. Okay, so this is the kind of coming, they came all the way up to her, right? Not just they came towards, but they actually came in to speak with her. Okay, and uleman are the maidens. It's like bachurot, naro, right? Rabnaha. So here the Sarisim are being translated as just the officers. It's the implication of Saris being a eunuch is not referred to in Targum Rishon. V'chaviu, and they told her. We're going to see there are 2 different words for telling. Okay, chaviu, I don't know if I talked about it last week, we'll talk about it this week. Chaviu is like the word in Hebrew, eza chavaya. What a lovely, hopefully lovely experience that was. And when you have a chavaya, then you want to talk about it and you want to tell about it. So in Aramaic, the same source that you have for chavaya, for an experience that's worth talking about is in fact the verb to tell. So that's this v'higid yagid, and they told her. Okay, we'll see the other verb shortly. V'izdazat makta. Okay, it's the same source that we had in the previous verse, meaning to be afraid. Lachta ma'od. The shadrat, and she transmitted. Okay, they have 2 different words for sending. In Aramaic, one of them is shlach, like in Hebrew, and the other is the shadrat, which we typically use for like shidur chai, meaning a live transmission on the radio, on television, something like that. but to transmit, to send something by means of someone or something else. So she sent these clothings, but not just general clothing, not stam clothing, okay, royal garb, the Malbish Yad Mordechai, Ulamaade Yad Sake, to dress Mordechai in and to remove, that's this Maade is Lahasir, to remove his sackcloth, Milave, from off of him, Velakibel, and he didn't accept it. Right? So they didn't add in a whole lot. Ukrat Esther Lidania. Wait a minute. The Hebrew is she called this person named Hatach. And Targum Rishon tells us she called Daniel. Demit Karai Hatach. He was called Hatach. Di'al Meimar Pume mit Chatkon Pitgame Malchuta. Because by his speech, the matters of the kingdom were decided. You know, the buck has to stop somewhere. Daniel had been a chief officer starting from the time of Nebuchadnezzar. And so the assumption of Targum Rishon is that he's still known by, you know, he's the man where the buck stops here. He's the one who makes the decision. And, you know, there's this version and there's this version and there's this version and this is how it is. And this is the exact language and this is how it's going to be done. And that's why he was called Hatach, like Chatach, like Lachtoch. Okay. And because, right, he's somebody who, say of the Melech, who had now been given to Esther. So this may be this business that Asher Ha'amid Lefaneha, that he was like appointed to her. If you say that this is Daniel, this may be a way of Achashverosh's sort of degrading Daniel's importance in his kingdom. Okay, yes, you're still an officer, but you can go deal with the matters of the queen. You're not going to be the main officer in my court. Okay, and so he sent him over to the queen. But anyway, and she commanded him about Mordechai. What is it she wants to know? She wants to know, this is the Mazeh, and then we're going to hear Al Mazeh, and it's two different things for Targum Rishon. What is this voice of crying that he was crying? Okay. And what was the reason that he refused to accept the royal garb that she had sent to him? So, two different questions that she has. That's what's going on. There are two different questions. And so that was what it was. And then the third verse is Unafak Hatach Lamala Levat Mordechai. Hatach went out to speak Lemor to Mordechai. Lifta'a de Karta. So if you're somebody who does Targum Onkelos and stuff, so we saw Pote repeatedly in last week's Parsha, which was Parsha Truma, because it talked about the Arke Upaute Verome, the length. Okay, Pote is the width, the breadth, Verome is the height of the Mishkan and of the Krashim and of the Uriot and all sorts of things that were involved in building the Mishkan. So we saw the same shorish repeatedly there. So this is the Rachov, is the wide place of the city. Okay, like a big open square. Okay, Dir Likdam Tra Paltrin Dmalka, that was in front of the gate of the palace of the king. Okay, so I just decided it was easier not to have to keep switching verse. So now we're going to switch over to Targum Sheni and see what Targum Sheni does with this shift of scene. Okay, and it's much shorter than we've been seeing in Targum Sheni. How about that? Now they have Va'atyan Ulemataha instead of Va'alan. They came, okay, towards her, but they didn't actually like right up to her. Okay. And so Esther's Narot came, the Sarisaha, and they leave it as the Sarisim. So you can understand it then to be the eunuchs who are also allowed to be in her presence. And instead of the Chavaya, instead of telling over something that happened firsthand, Targum Sheni says, V'taniula, and they repeated to her. This is the same language that Aramaic uses that we call, right, Vishinantam, and you should repeat it to your children. Mishnah is something that is learned about peh, that you learn how to say it by memory because you repeat it over and over again until you get it. And so this issue of repeating things over again, of shnayim, of two, of again. So that's this root here, v'tanil. And they repeated it over to her. Okay. Let me make this larger. All right. V'itzat magtalachta, and the queen became very afraid. Excuse me. V'shadrad levushin milbasha yat Mordechai, and she sent clothing. Here it's not royal clothing, just clothing to dress Mordechai in. U'lemebar sakya mineh, and that his sackcloth should be removed from him. V'lakibel, and he didn't accept it. They didn't add in a whole lot new understanding, right? Ukvat Esther lahantach. Chad misari say malka, and here he's called Hatach. We're not given this insight about him being called, that he's actually Daniel, who's called Hatach. She calls to Hatach, who's one of the Sarisim of the king, Dihava Kaim Kadmaha, who had been appointed there before her. Ufakidit Yate al Mordechai, and she commanded him about Mordechai. Limida Maden Va'al Maden. And it's just a straight translation, not explaining to know what this is and about what this is, but not dividing it up into two separate things that she wanted to know about, the way Targum Rishon did. Unafak hatach levat Mordechai la'ashkake, or lefutia, the karta. And Hatach went out to Mordechai. Now, what's ashkake? The shuk. Okay, the marketplace, because you've got the palace, you've got the gate of the palace where all of the business of the kingdom basically takes place, and there's court and there's all sorts of things. And then beyond that, you have the shuk where people sell stuff and food and clothing and all sorts of things. And so the Targum Sheni, which is written, like we said, it's written in somewhere between 800 and 1000 of the Common Era, quite probably. But that was the way that cities in the Mideast and the Near East were done. There was, the wealthy district, palaces, gates in front of them. There was the king's palace, which was also an administrative center, and it was in the entry to that a lot of the business took place. And then there was the marketplace that was just outside, which was in a wide place, but it got filled up with all the little stalls and stuff of the merchants. So the authors of Targum Sheni are telling you their reality of what their cities look like, what's right in front of the king's palace, what's the place where Mordechai is going to be found, because he can't go into the administrative area and the business area, like white collar business area. He's going to be out in the shuk. Okay. But there's a nod to the fact that the Hebrew actually said the rachov, the wide part of the city. Di'it kadam tra beit malka, that was in front of the gate of the king, of the house of the king. Okay. Here, earlier, they did use paltrin, but you'll notice that neither one of them is happy to just call it tra malka. They don't want to just say the gate of the king. They want to say the gate of the king's house, the gate of the king's palace, where the Hebrew just had Shar HaMelech. Okay, and then V'havele. Oh no, that's all we did, right? We did Dalet Heva. Very good. We did Dalet Heva. Okay, so and now I'm going to switch back again to the Megillah and its Targum. Okay, and so now we're going to do, let's see if I can do Zayin Chet, maybe just Zayin and Chet, because that's all that fits onto the one screen here. V'yeged Mordechai. Okay, so again, because what's happened, we now have again a change of scene. The first thing was out in the city. The next thing was what was going on in the palace. And then, and the transition of Hathach going to speak to Mordechai. And now we have the discussion between Mordechai and Hathach. The Megillah tells us, V'yeged lo Mordechai ekol asher karahu. Mordechai told him everything that happened to him. It's not quite clear. Probably karahu has happened to him. V'ed parshat hakesef asher amar Haman lishkol al ginzei hamelech v'Yehudim la'abdam. And also the episode of the silver that Haman said to weigh out into the treasuries of the king on the Jews, in the Jews, like, what does that mean, right? In other words, about the Jews, la'abdam, in order to destroy them. That, in other words, he's willing to pay for the Jews in order that he can destroy the Jews. And so he told her everything asher karahu sounds like everything that happened to him, to Mordechai, not everything that happened, because if it's kol asher kara, but it's karahu. All right, so there's a question there in the Hebrew that needs to be answered. And also this whole episode with the money. If you are if the episode with the money was something that was secret, the question is how did Mordechai know about it? If the episode with the money was something that had been written in the letter that Achashverosh had plastered all over the place, the way Targum Sheni told us it was, then it makes perfect sense that he knows about it and can tell about it. So, perhaps that's part of why Targum Sheni put that in. And then the next verse is, right, because this is still what Mordechai is telling Hathach. Ve'et Patshegen K'tav Hadat Asher Nitan B'Shushan Mahashmidah. And also this decree that had been given, Patshegen K'tav, it was It was written in Kasti. It was written in, and then it was transliterated into all the other languages of people who lived in that place. And then it was also written in other words, this is the whole business of telling to people and reading it to them. So it was read out loud to them, but it was also then posted. And so it was the explanation of it, meaning translation, right? That's why we call Patsheg and Ktav is the translation of Targum Sheni. Right? It's the explanation / translation of Targum Sheni. So this is Patsheg Tav Hadat. This is the explanation / translation of this law that had been given out in Shushan to destroy them, meaning to destroy the Jews, because that's what we just were talking about by Yehudim, that they were paid for to destroy them, the Adam, and Lahashmidam, to completely destroy them. Natan Lo, he gave it to him. Okay, so he didn't tell him over what it was. He gave him a copy of this Patsheg and Ktav. Laharot et Esther, to show it to Esther, Ulagidla, and to tell her. What? To tell her. Okay. Uletzavot aleha lavo el hamelech ulhitchanen lo ulevakesh milfanav al ama. And to command her that she should come to the king to plead before him and to request from before him for her people. Now, we all know the story. Esther hasn't told anybody that she's a Jew. So if you don't say that Hatach is Daniel, you've got a problem, okay, that Mordechai is all of a sudden revealing the queen's origins to somebody who is one of the king's officers, even if it's a king's officer who's appointed to serve the queen. But like, I don't know if anybody's ever paid attention to this. It's so interesting to me. I pay so much closer attention when I have to go verse by verse, and I have to go with the Targumei, and I see how they deal with the issues. It's like, oh, I never paid attention to that before. Like, Pitom, how does he know? How can he say this to this person? If you say Hatach is Daniel, it's fine. Okay. If you say that Hatach is just one of the Sarisim, it's like, how the heck is he getting away with doing that? Like, what did he do that for? Okay. So Targum Rishon, Vachavida, again, the Vayagad, and this is firsthand, right? Mordechai, Yat Kol Di A, everything that had happened, and it's again the him, that A ending, that happened, what? Al Esek de la Sagid Lahaman. Because of the matter that he didn't bow down to Haman. It really is a kol asher karahu. Everything that happened to Mordechai, or everything that, the degree to which Mordechai is personally responsible for what's happening to the Jews. Okay? Everything that happened because of him. Because he refused to bow down to Haman. And he also didn't get down on his belly before an andart. We use the word in Hebrew today, is like a memorial plaque or sign, and sometimes it's some sort of a statue, some kind of a memorial kind of thing. In this case, the andarta of Haman's was he, according to Chazal, right? He was wearing some kind of a gachka, some kind of a small idol or whatever. And not only was Mordechai refusing to bow down to Haman, a human being, but it was particularly because he had that andarta on him that Mordechai was not willing to go on his belly before that. And So that takes care of the karahu. And now the drara de mamon, the how follow the trail of the money. Okay, the trail of the money. And the kesef, that it was asar alfin kikari, the 10,000 talents of silver is the way it's usually translated to English. Diamar Haman, the mitka, that Haman had said that he would weigh out al yedehon de gabain de maman al beit ginze malka. Okay, I had a little bit of a problem translating lishkol al ginze hamelach. Targum had the same problem, so they just put in extra words, which is that he said that he would weigh out into the hands of the Gabayim, right? The people who were responsible for collecting, that had been appointed over the king's treasury. And now it makes much more sense, because lishkol al ginzei hamelach is like a little weird. But to weigh it out into the hands of the collectors, that makes much more sense. Okay, begin Yehuda I for the Jews, right? Not the Yehudim, but in order to buy them, lahovadoton, and to destroy them. And then here we go. V'yat ditagma ktav. Okay, that's our patshegan ktav. Gezerta de'ijihiv b'Shushan, of the decree that had been given out in the city of Shushan, l'sheitseyuton yahavle. Okay. V'yat ditagma ktav gezerta de'ijihiv b'Shushan l'sheitseyuton. This Pachek Ktav, this a copy of this decree that had been given forth in Shushan to destroy them, meaning to destroy the Jews, he gave to him. Mordechai gave to Hatach. La'achaza yat Esther, to show it to Esther. Ulachava'ala ma dechashav Haman rishia al alma de Yehuda. And to tell her, right, because we just had ulahagid la, to tell her what? Okay, to tell her that which Haman was planning, calculating, Haman the wicked, don't forget the wicked, was calculating to do to the people of the Jews. Which, okay, ulafakta Allah, and to command her, to the queen, leme'al, to go, not just to go, to come, but to come into Levat Malka, to the king, Lefaisale, to appease him, Ulmabaye Rachmin al Ama, and to request mercy on her people. And again, all of a sudden we have that it's her people. Now, Targumei, who told us that Hatach was Daniel, it's no problem, okay? Because it's not just her people, and it's not just Mordechai's people, it's also Hatach's people, so we don't have a problem. All right? And we'll switch to the Patshegim Ktav. And, or more to the point, to Targum Sheni. Okay. So Zayin is still here on this little bit here. Vahavi le Mordechai yat kol the arayate. If it were a chet, I would say, and he told him Vahavi le, and he and it was to him. He gave it to him. He told him whatever. Okay, everything that happened to him. The yat here is even clearer. It's not the arai with the a adding on to it. Everything that happened to him. Okay, but it doesn't explain what happened. Where Targum Rishon gave us some insight into what Mordechai's responsibility and personal involvement is. V'yad Perush Kaspa Diamar Haman Lemit Kol Levet Ginzei Demalka, and the explanation of the money, of the silver that Haman had said that he would weigh out to the house of the to the treasure house of the king. Okay, and now I'm going to need to make this a little smaller so that I can see the whole thing. Metul Yehodei, because of the Jews, that makes it much easier. Lahovada Yaton, to wipe them out, to destroy them. V'yat Perush Ktava Ditagma de Faris B'Shushan. And this explanation of what was written and an actual copy of the decree that had been posted in Shushan, the Mishetzaya Yaton, to destroy them. Yahavle, he gave it to him. Okay. The Machazaya, to show, Ulimitanya. And to tell her, as in to repeat it over to her. And in parentheses, we have the mechaza, to show, who are you supposed to show it to? To show it to Esther. Okay, not to the queen, to Esther. And again, we have, instead of the other word for lahagid, we have again this word of, and repeat. This, the first part you tell her, that's firsthand knowledge that Mordechai has. And this you need to repeat over to her, to read it to her, show it to her, discuss with her what's written down there. Ulamifkad Allah, and to command her, litzavot, to command her, lemea levat malka, to go in before the king, to go into the king, not before. And to plead before him, right? Like Kel Chanon Barachum Chanon. Mibaye min Kadamoy Mitul Ama. And to request from before him Matul again, for the sake of, because of her people. And nobody seems to be too worried about why it is that it's okay to have Hatach know that Esther's a Jew. So let me keep track of the time. We're almost out of time because I can't. So I said I was going to do through verse 10. So seeing as verses 9 and 10 are really short, I'm going to keep my word and I'm going to go all the way through verse 10, and then I'm calling it quits. V'yavo Hatach v'yiged le'Esther et divrei Mordechai. Okay, change the scene again. We're back to the palace. Hatach comes and he tells Esther the words of Mordechai. V'tomer Esther laHatach v'tzaveu el Mordechai. And we're going to leave it as a cliffhanger. And Esther says to Hatach, and she commands him back to Mordechai. So it's interesting. Or the first time was v'tzaveu al Mordechai. She commanded him about Mordechai, that he should take him the right clothing. He should, enter into a discussion with him, ladat maza ba'al maza. This time she's sending, when it's v'tzavehu el Mordechai, she's sending a command to Mordechai by means of Hatach, which is different. Okay. Va'al Hatach v'chave le'Esther yat pitgemei Mordechai. Hatach enters in before the queen and he tells Esther the words of Mordechai. Va'amarat Esther laHatach. And so Esther says to Hatach, L'mezal u'lamalala Mordechai, that he should go and he should talk with Mordechai. Wait a second, you see that in the Hebrew? I don't see that in the Hebrew. Okay, they're expanding. He should go and he should talk with Mordechai. Ufakedat le, and she commanded him al esech Mordechai, about this thing that Mordechai, remember, this is the Targum that told us that Mordechai had explained Asher Karahu, that which happened to him, the stuff, how he was personally involved and how he had kind of gotten Haman's anger, dander up. Okay. So she's sending a command back to Mordechai. Ezek Mordechai, and this business that he got himself involved in, Dela Yagacha Im Haman, that he shouldn't get into, he shouldn't start up with Haman. Okay, Matsuta, any kind of disagreement with Haman. Awum, Devavu, Deve, Yaakov, Esav, Havanatarle. Because the enmity that was between Yaakov and Esav is, right? Esav soneh at Yaakov. That's a din. That's halacha. That's part of the way the world works. And right now, in this point in the story, Esther says, there's really no point in starting up because you're not going to succeed in helping Haman do his tshuva for his avodah zarah, and only bad things are going to come of this. Don't start up. We have a principle in Chazal that that when somebody's star is on the ascendant, you don't start up with them. You don't start up with somebody whose star is on the ascendant. The wheel turns. They'll come back down again. And if you need to, but somebody where everything's going well for them, like, don't get into a court case with them. Don't start up with them. Just keep your head down. All right. To what extent that's galut mentality, to what extent that's just simply good psychology, but it's definitely a mamar of Chazal, and even in Targum Rishon, they're hinting at that. Okay. And so now I'm going to do the Targum Sheni on those same last two verses, and then we will call it quits, and we'll pick up with verse 11 next week. Okay, he came. So they're not, in Targum Sheni, they're pretty much not using the shorish of entering in as much. So Hatach came, but Tane, right, he repeated over, not v'chave, not that he told her firsthand what experience, like Eza Chavaya, but the Tane, he repeated over to Esther Yat Miloi de Mordechai, the words, Mordechai's words. V'amrat Esther Hatach Kadte Metul Mordechai. And Esther speaks to Hatach, and she gives him a command about, with respect, she sends some sort of command to Mordechai, and we're going to leave it there. Okay? I hope that everybody has a healthy week and a joyous week, even though we're at the scariest part of our story. But Baruch Hashem, because we learn and listen to Megillat Esther every year, we know that the story will come out well in the end. But at the moment, we're stuck in the heavy part. But long before we get to Purim itself, we will get to more joyous parts of the Megillah. And so I wish you all a wonderful day. Okay, I'm going to stop my share altogether. And I'm going to stop the YouTube.